This presentation will provide an overview of the Narellan Creek Catchment Flood Study that has been prepared to support the public exhibition of the Narellan Creek Catchment Flood Study report. This project is being completed as part of the New South Wales Government's flood risk management process. The goals of this process are to reduce the impact of flooding on individual owners and occupiers, reduce private and public loss from flooding, and ensure new development is compatible with the flood risk and doesn't create additional flooding problems elsewhere. The Narellan Creek Catchment Flood Study represents stages 1 and 2 in this process. The end goal of the flood study is to define the nature and extent of flood behaviour. In so doing, it enables us to identify where there are flooding problem spots, and that serves as a starting point for the floodplain risk management study and plan, where different options for reducing that flood risk can be explored. This slide shows the extent of the Narellan Creek catchment, which covers a total area of 35 square kilometres. It includes the suburbs of Narellan, Narellan Vale, Harrington Park, Currans Hill, Kirkham, Elderslie and Mount Annan. All of the blue lines that you can see on screen correspond to creeks and watercourses. So in addition to Narellan Creek, there are 8 other creeks and rivulets that also form part of this study. The Narellan Creek Catchment Flood Study focuses on 2 types of flooding, mainstream flooding and overland flooding. Mainstream flooding is associated with water from creeks that overtop the banks of the creek and inundate the adjoining floodplain. Overland or stormwater flooding occurs away from creeks, and it's most commonly associated with intense, short-duration rainfall bursts that overwhelm the capacity of the stormwater system. In such cases, the excess water will get carried along roads and may, in large events, get carried through properties as well. The downstream or western sections of the catchment can also be impacted by backwater flooding from the Nepean River. That type of flooding mechanism is not being considered as part of this study, but Camden Council is currently preparing an updated flood study for the Nepean River, which will provide a comprehensive assessment of the potential for backwater flooding across the Narellan Creek catchment. This slide shows 2 photographs which provide examples of mainstream and overland flooding. The photograph on the left was captured in 2016 from the rear of a property in Horseman Place at Currans Hills, and this is showing floodwaters that came from Kenny Creek and inundated the area adjoining the creek. On the right hand side, we've got another photo that was captured in 2016. This photo is showing inundation of Welling Drive at Mount Annan, which is situated away from a formal watercourse or creek. In this case, the rainfall has overwhelmed the drainage system, resulting in inundation of Welling Drive. So that's a good example of overland or stormwater inundation. The overall goal of the current study is to improve the understanding of flood behaviour and risk across the full extent of the catchment from both mainstream and overland flooding. So this will build upon previous flood studies and flood models that have previously been used across the catchment to provide a more detailed understanding of overland and mainstream flooding behaviour. And this is actually the first time that a detailed assessment of overland flooding has been completed. Not only will this provide updated flood information for Council, but this information can also be provided to the New South Wales SES to assist with emergency management and response planning. And it will also assist with assessing further development in the catchment to ensure that any future development doesn't make the existing flooding situation worse. The public exhibition of the draft Narellan Creek Catchment Flood Study represents the second time the community has been asked to provide input into the study. Stage 1 of the community consultation was completed during the early phases of the project and included the distribution of an information brochure and questionnaire to around 3,000 properties, a Camden Your Voice website, as well as in-person and online drop-in sessions. We received a total of 45 questionnaire responses back, and that questionnaire response provided valuable flood depth level and photo information for a range of floods. The most commonly reported floods were the July 2022, March 2022 and June 2016 events. This information was valuable in calibrating the computer flood models that were developed as part of the project. One of the major tasks that was completed as part of this project involved the development of computer flood models that were used to simulate flood behavior. Two different types of computer models were developed for the study: a hydrologic model that was developed using the WB&M software, and a hydraulics model that was developed using the 2Flow software. The hydrologic model is used to simulate the transformation of rainfall into runoff, so it is what we use to determine how much flow ends up in the various creeks and along the various roads. The hydraulic model takes the flows from the hydrologic model and is used to calculate how that water would move and be distributed across the catchment. But it's important to ensure that those models are generating realistic estimates of flood behavior. Therefore, they were calibrated against the data that was provided by the community for the June 2016, March 2022, and July 2022 events. And that included surveyed flood marks, as well as various community flood reports and flood photos. The outcomes of the model calibration showed a good agreement between surveyed and simulated flood levels. For the June 2016 event, the average difference between simulated and surveyed levels was 15 centimetres. For the March 2022 event, the average difference was 7 centimetres, and for the July 2022 event, the average difference was just 4 centimetres. So this provides confidence that the computer models that we have developed are generating reliable estimates of flood behaviour. The calibrated flood models were then used to simulate a range of design floods based on Australian Rainfall and Runoff 2019, which is a national guideline that we use for flood estimation. And design floods are referred to according to their chance of occurring in any one year. So for example, a 1% AEP flood, or annual exceedance probability flood, has a 1% chance of occurring in any one year. The design floods that we simulated varied from a 50% AEP flood, so quite a frequent flood, so the type of event you'd likely to see every couple of years, right through to the probable maximum flood, or PMF, which is the largest flood that could occur. Using the outputs from the flood model, we prepared a range of mapping to display the results, and this included information describing water depths, velocities or the speed of water movement, as well as water levels. This next slide provides an example of some of the information that is produced by the computer flood models. In this case, we have a flood animation that's showing predicted water depths in the 1% AEP, or 1 in 100 chance per year flood. As you can see by the legend in the lower right hand corner, the different shades of blue here correspond to different water depths, with darker blue corresponding to deeper water. And you can see running through the center of this particular slide, we have a creek, in this case Kenny Creek, and you can see the inundation that is sourced from that creek inundating the areas adjacent to the creek, and that's an example of mainstream inundation. But you can also see a couple of roads located away from the creek that also get wet, particularly down the bottom right hand corner. So that's an example of overland inundation. This is another animation, this time for the upper Narellan Creek catchment. So a lot more built up, and you see a lot more of that overland inundation along roads. So if you look at the red arrows, they're pointing to the locations of where there's overland flooding, which is focused on the roads. But we also do have an example of mainstream flooding running from south to north towards the middle of the slide as well. This slide provides an example of one of the flood maps that are included in the draft report. This one is focused in on the Mount Annan area. We have the Mount Annan Marketplace up the top here, and it's showing peak water depths for the 1% AEP, or 1 in 100 chance per year flood. And again, the different shades of blue corresponding to different water depths, with darker blue meaning deeper water. And generally speaking, the darker water corresponds with well-defined water courses or water features. So that's the mainstream inundation. It's characterized by deeper water. Away from the creeks, you might be able to see lighter shades of blue. So that's the overland flooding, and it's typically characterized by water depths that are less than 20 centimeters or so. And for the most part, most of the overland flooding is contained to roads, particularly during frequent events. But once we do get up to larger floods, water from the road can extend across the front boundary of some properties. This next slide is again showing a floodwater depth map covering that same area, but this time it's showing water depths for the probable maximum flood, which is the largest flood that can occur. And you can see a lot of those darker blues centered around mainstream flooding areas are a bit more prominent, particularly around Lake Annan. And you can also see that we're seeing deeper water in the roadways as well, and more water across the roadways in general. So when it comes to a PMF, we're seeing a lot more properties that are impacted during a flood of this size. As I mentioned earlier, this is the first time that a detailed overland flood study has been completed for the Narellan Creek catchment. As a result, a number of new properties have been newly identified as being at least partly inundated during an overland flood. In addition, the new flood guidelines that we've employed as part of this project have resulted in some changes to properties subject to mainstream inundation. However, the outcomes of the flood study have identified that during frequent to moderate sized floods, overland flooding is typically characterized by shallow water depths that are mostly contained to local roads. However, properties near roads can still be partly inundated. During more extreme floods, such as the probable maximum flood, we're predicting nearly 1,400 road segments being cut by floodwater, with more than 300 roads inundated with a depth of more than 1 metre. So we're predicting a large number of properties that would be at least partly inundated and a number of roads that would be cut. So even properties that are not directly inundated would be indirectly impacted due to access difficulties. The outcomes of the Narellan Creek flood study have been documented in the draft Narellan Creek Catchment Flood Study Report. The draft report comprises 2 volumes. Volume 1 comprises all the report text and appendices, and Volume 2 contains all the figures and flood mapping that has been generated as part of the project. The draft Narellan Creek flood study is currently on public exhibition. The public exhibition will run from the 26th of May 2025 to the 30th of June 2025. Physical copies of the flood study report and maps can be viewed at Council's Administration Building, as well as Oran Park, Camden and Narellan libraries. There is also a Camden Your Voice website, which provides additional information about the study, including digital copies of the report and figures, frequently asked questions, and definitions for commonly used flood terminology. There will also be 3 public information sessions that will be held at Narellan Library in the Red Gum Room. Those information sessions will be held on Saturday the 7th of June from 11 AM to 3 PM, Tuesday the 10th of June from 9 AM to 1 PM, and Wednesday the 18th of June from 3:30 PM to 7:30 PM. This will provide you with an opportunity to come in and ask questions from the study team and raise any concerns that you might have. If you would like to make a submission on the draft flood study report, they can be made to Council via the Your Voice website, by email to floodplains@camden.nsw.gov.au, or in writing to Floodplain Management, PO Box 183, Camden, New South Wales 2570. Please ensure that all submissions are received no later than the 30th of June 2025. All submissions that are received will be reviewed, and where necessary, any updates will be incorporated within the final version of the flood study report. Thank you.